Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Yeah, sometimes I said to a few people this morning, I don't know how I'll make through today. I feel a bit teary with the goodness of God, even just this week. I was praying this morning while I was on the treadmill, and the sun was just starting to come up, and I was praying for our youth. One of our youth is being baptised today, and it's just so special. And I was praying for this particular person and all of our youth, and as I was doing that, and I was listening to my worship music while I'm running, and the sun was just coming up out of the clouds, and just as I had this person's name, when the light comes like that out of the top of the cloud, and I was just like, oh. So I just felt very seen and heard by God in that moment as I was lifting those youth to them, and wanted to just share that as an encouragement, but also so that you can hold them in your heart today for that special thing that's happening. And this was a little bit more, I wanted to share, if it's okay, onto my communion talk, the inner sort of ritual that I go through in my mind every week when I take communion and what it means for me. I invite you, if you want to, it's a bit of a visual picture, so if you'd like to close your eyes and imagine with me, you can do whatever works for you. The visual picture that I see is Jesus on a cross on a hill, and there's me looking down on the scene from above or wherever, and I'm face down, palms down in the grass at his feet. And it's just the two of us, and time stands still. Jesus abiding always. And there's me saying, have mercy on me, forgive me. I'm sorry for my sins. I reflect, I confess, and it's raw. Jesus abiding always. Me thinking, I'm so grateful, I'm just in awe of him. I can, and so I do, surrender it all. He is all-powerful. He's majestic. Jesus abiding always. He gives his body, his blood, his life, his forgiveness. There he is on the cross, suffering and sacrificing. But he's looking down at me with a gentle, loving, filled expression. He's just gazing on me in just such a beautiful way, with absolute compassion, love, and acceptance. I'm there on my knees and I tear up at the depth and breadth of his love. I wonder, how is it possible that he's always there, every time, to listen, to commune, to love, to forgive, to make new. Every time, always, abiding. God, I pray we may always walk towards him. May we reflect, confess, lay it all down and receive. May we receive his body, his spirit, his love. May we feel his abiding, always love, every day anew. He's brought me home. May we walk on in love and carry his peace and presence with us wherever we go. Amen.
Morning, church. I'm Tara. If we haven't met, I do see a few new faces. And I get the privilege of kind of introducing our series for today, and also giving a little bit of a insight into our first practice. I got my own little insight into exactly what I'm going to be talking about this morning when I was on my way here, and I was already a little bit late. I'll be upfront about that. But then I kind of got in. What I do usually when I am speaking is I will drive by myself and kind of rehearse or talk myself through what I'm going to be speaking on, and I clearly got in a little bit of a muscle memory mode and kept driving all the way to the city. I spent a few years doing church at UWA, and so I think I've still done more sermon rehearsals on the way there than here, and so that's where I ended up, and had to turn around and find my way back here because I definitely don't belong there anymore. And so this morning we're going to be exploring some of the things that we do every week that hopefully help shape our muscle memory together as a church. I love the way that there is a potential for what we practice to actually create in us kind of like a safety net that is exercised when we don't have the capacity to think through exactly what we need to do. It's the things that we practice together that hopefully in our harder times or in the times when it counts, we sort of know what to do instinctively. And so we're going to talk a little bit of that or about that over the next few weeks. One of the things I love about Westcity is that we get to bring together kind of the sacramental and liturgical elements in a bit more of a contemporary or accessible to everyone kind of way. Some of the tradition, I guess, without a bunch of the baggage that it can come with. And I also believe that there is so much safety and potentially even freedom in structure and consistency, and when we know what we're doing together without it being rigid or controlling. Like anything, though, over time, explanations can be taken for granted and the meaningful can become kind of mindless or at least less potent without regularly revisiting why it is we do what we do. Before I get to that, I thought we should at least start with some scripture so that if you don't like what I say, I can blame it on the Bible. So we're going to look at a passage in Matthew 25 from verse 34. And then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was in prison, and you visited me. I was sick, and you took care of me." And then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? When was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." There is a story we tell ourselves about how we become a good person, a good Christian, a good parent or child, or a good friend, or how we become together even acceptable, the people of God, the church. The story says that we're made by the things that we know, by what we read, by what we hold as truth, that we're made righteous because of the things that we define correctly, that we belong because of how we agree or maybe how we together disapprove. that we are what we are because of what we believe. I wonder if some of this is fueled by a kind of narrow view of faith that's more intellectual and cognitive than it is incarnational. But I don't have time to delve into that, so maybe listen to my last. I think I talked about that. I've been asked as a parent at times, or when our kids bring home a prospective partner, or even friends, and I've also recently been discussing this kind of thing with co-workers when we're considering hiring someone for our team. And the question comes up, when we're talking about if someone is a good fit, yeah, but are they a Christian? Have you ever been asked that or wondered that? Maybe you've asked that. While I believe in the value of shared perspective in partnerships especially, and I definitely love to spend time with people who are like-minded where I get to talk about the things of God, I don't care as much these days if someone identifies as a Christian or if they believe the right things. I'm much more interested if a person would be welcomed by the King in Jesus' illustration in Matthew 25. Because even if the right belief could save us, or doctrine really was the way to stay on the narrow path, words and language are a fallible and finite medium, completely insufficient to describe the things of God. And the more I've learnt about church tradition and the wisdom of using creativity and beauty to navigate mystery, it makes sense that images, art and architecture shape how we move and respond in spaces like these, that light and sound can engage senses and imagination, that incense and familiar patterns and pathways help to invoke memories, that poetry and songs inspire and guide and instruct us in the ways of God. Liturgical intentionality can help us to meet mystery. Science is beginning to understand, or maybe catch up with, what ancient wisdom has kind of always known, that even if it's describing it in slightly different language, there is power in what we practice, and especially power in what we practice together. And when I say practice, I mean something that involves active participation and also repetition. Those two things are actually important. The potential of familiar structure and well-worn paths to create psychological safety is beginning to be recognised in kind of spaces, therapeutic spaces, or in the kind of environments where I work with young people who are needing to recover from some pretty traumatic backgrounds or find their way in a world that they don't feel like they fit in. When we create safety and familiarity, consistency, that it actually allows us psychologically to engage more effectively with learning, or maybe even unlearning and rethinking things, to grow in our capacity to understand ourselves and especially understand others. That creating that openness is really important. And so is it any wonder that the church perhaps revisits discipleship patterns year after year, and that we repeat things in these sort of spaces that might start to sound a little bit maybe mundane, but I want to revisit the potential of what God can do with the ordinary things that we do every day. The importance of movement and sensory engagement in our cognition is actually becoming more and more of a focus in psychology and therapy, and even in learning and education. And there's a whole field of study dedicated to the neurobiological connections and interactions between people, what happens in community, and that they're starting to study and understand that there are things that are happening between us when we gather, not just in us individually. We have increasing evidence that we much more reliably become what we do than what we think. There's some fun little kind of research and studies that showed things like office workers using visibly sustainable products become more actively environmentally conscious over time. That church groups whose food drives focused on providing aid to refugee programs become more supportive of refugee rights and even shifted voting preferences. That even shifted voting preferences towards being more favourable, towards more favourable policies. Even teaching a young child, before they're able to developmentally understand gratitude, teaching them to say thank you increases their perception of what they appreciate when they do come. So if you've been taught to say thank you for a certain thing, as a young child, before you're able to understand true gratitude, that child, when it can articulate gratitude, appreciates those things more than a child that didn't actively say thank you over time. I could actually use this whole time to just dive into the active nature of words and what we say out loud, not just thoughts alone, but speaking words aloud. Think about an apology. If someone just, if you had this implied awareness that someone maybe felt some regret for something, that's not going to be received as an acceptable repair in that relationship, the same way as if they come to you with a verbal apology and express their regret. There is something more in the words spoken than just the thoughts or the understanding. So the words liturgy and sacrament I'm going to talk a little bit about. Both come from roots that contain the concept of an oath or commitment or a different kind of confession made in public. The power in these is not in the believing, but in the professing. And by power, I mean presence, and I'm going to come back to that. Liturgy, the word, comes from the Latin liturgia, which is derived from a Greek combination of the word that we get our word laity, or that kind of church word laity from, that kind of meant the general people, and ergos, which means work. It's often said to mean the work of the people. But I've come to understand, I've read a little bit more, that it probably would be more accurate to say, or maybe at least to also say, that it can mean the work for the people. It's not so much expressive or something that we do for God as it is formative. It's a response because of who we worship, and it does something in us for the sake of all people. Ergos is also where we derive our word energy from. It relates to power, like not authority power, but like strength or like muscle power and effort. And liturgy is etymologically tied to the word ligament, which, the tissues that bind and connect. Muscles and ligaments animate the human body and its movement. And liturgy can be viewed likewise. It is the thing that binds us together and animates what we do together as a community. And where liturgy speaks to what we do together in community, sacrament speaks of what God does in us when we do things together in community. Whenever I hear about people speak of the Christian life as a co-worker with co-workers with Christ in the kingdom, I do like the expression, but I always wonder what could I bring to the table? Like, I feel a bit weird about anything I could do with God. Appropriate response. The work that we do together feels like one of the things that I can reconcile, as being a way that we participate in the work that God does. Not because we are co-workers being, saviours of others, but practicing our own liberation through what we do together. I have a favourite theologian, or a few, but one, James K.A. Smith, puts it this way, that Christian worship should tell a story that makes us want to set sail for the immense sea that is the triune God. In his book, You Are What You Love, Smith explains how actions, especially habits and repetition, shape our devotion. By intentionally directing our attention and shaping our desires, it in turn shapes our affections, which then shapes our character and our communities. Neuroscience and psychology is confirming that an understanding or conviction can follow action. Action first, thoughts or thinking later. More so, action and repetition, sensory engagement, emotional engagement, and peer reinforcement or group participation has the potential to shift and change our thinking. There's a fun little book called Mind in Motion by Barbara Tversky, which explains all kinds of very neuroscience kind of based, but they have a process where they can map what the mind does. So map what the brain is thinking and then recreate that image in another room without visuals on the person. So if the person is moving, they can just read the electrical signals of the brain and then recreate the image of that person moving in another room, right? And they did this with people who were masters of a particular instrument or lifelong users of a particular tool of trade. And what they found is that the people who used those tools or instruments over a lifetime or with lots of repetition, their brains mapped those instruments or tools as part of their own body. So their brain's visual image of themselves held the hammer or instrument or whatever it was. That thing that they did had become part of their perceived identity. I think that's fascinating, and I think it says so much about what we do together, what we do repeatedly, especially actively and participating, and how it can impact how we see ourselves. So the practice that I get to use as my example this week is giving. We've been talking a little bit about it over the last couple of weeks with our Common Purse and hearing about the way that the church does that together and what we do with what we receive in those offerings. But giving is something we do every week as well at Westcity. It's also something that we do deliberately without a lot of fuss. Like most weeks, you won't hear very much about it at all, and I think that actually is its own kind of liturgy, that we don't speak about it, we don't actually bring a lot of attention to it, and I think that's because we want to be a community that's free from the shame and control around fundraising that has been harmful in churches or other places that we've been part of, that's even done violence to the church's witness. And so we deliberately participate in a way that avoids that. By the way, the academic reference for some of that is John Oliver's episode on televangelists, if you want to look that up. I take no responsibility for the amount of swearing in the video, if you watch it. So the church often has a lot to say about things that Jesus didn't speak many words about at all, but completely misses some of the bigger matters, including what Jesus had to say about how the religious institutions dealt with resources. There's hundreds of passages, in fact, including quite a few pointed chapters in Luke. I think there's a passage in Luke 21 that you might be pretty familiar with if you've spent 5 minutes in most churches. Luke chapter 21, verse 1, and this is the passage that'll be familiar. Jesus is speaking in towards the end of his ministry to the disciples and sharing some parables, but also some warnings. And and then this thing happens. He looks up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury, and he also saw a poor widow putting 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she in her poverty has put in all she had to live on." Have you heard that taught before? Yeah. And there's no doubt that there is, that Jesus is honouring her actions. But what you probably wouldn't have heard taught in church is that this is part of a passage, not separated by a title or chapter number when this was written, that starts with this. It says, "In hearing all of the people, he said to the disciples, 'Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogue and the best places of honour at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation.'" Then he shares about the widow and then says, when some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, "As for these things you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another and all will be thrown down." It is a very pointed, very deliberate connection between what he sees the temple doing and the judgment that he speaks. This was not meant to be a passage that was to guilt the people who had nothing to give the last of what they had to live on. It was a passage to actually condemn the fact that the religious institutions were not caring for the people who they were supposed to care for, and in fact they were living on the last of what she had to live on. They were living in excess, devour widows' houses. This comes after all kinds of other instructions and the parable of the rich man and all of that. It is, if you read it together, you can see all that to say, this is not that. I believe there's a way to talk about giving and bringing together what we can contribute in a way that isn't that. I believe it's important to say that, there has been places that the church has gone wrong institutionally, collectively, and places where power has been abused historically and even currently. But it's still important to speak about how we can come together and share what we have and practice giving together as a community. When our liturgy includes giving together, it's an invitation that bringing together resources, we can actively become creators of a sanctuary, a place where God's presence can be found by those who are looking, where people can be cared for. Through sharing and redistribution, like we talked about through the last couple of weeks, we practice biblical justice and imagine a world where everyone has enough. Through generosity and participation, including receiving as need be, we practice being one body, members dependent on each other in different ways. And through contributing without control, we practice trust and collaboration. And through the discipline of tithing, which I will say something about, or regular proportional sacrifice, we practice exercising restraint, and I think that's important. There is a depth of what just the practice of not living according to everything you have, but setting limitations before life sets its own limitations on you. The practice of actually showing restraint. And when we practice this together, we actually practice resisting empires of excess and mindsets of never enough. Through giving together, we become a generous people. In the act of doing, we become. And through sharing, we become builders of a community where the vision is a kingdom where all are invited and everyone has enough. There's something supernatural, greater than the sum of its individual parts, when the people of God put the good news plan of God into practice. Something sacred, even. And this, to me, is how practice becomes sacrament, how what we do becomes what God does, and how liturgy leads to transformed lives and transformed community. This is how we become what we love. So today I'm going to close in a prayer of confession and invite us to the table, which is another practice that we come to every week. I said I'd say more on the tithing thing as a side note, because maybe you grew up in a tradition like me where you were guilted into thinking that you had to. If you read it literally, you'd give 30% because it was 3 times a year, and if you read it literally, you'd also only give if you owned land or livestock. And if you do happen to own livestock, by the way, we don't want 10% of your sheep next week. Not a good idea. That'd be a mess. It's about what we all bring according to what we have. The idea of sharing as community and the way that the New Testament church practiced it was each bought according to what they had and shared according to what they needed. So let's pray. God, you are good, and you have good plans for us. And your word says that you own the cattle on 1,000 hills. You don't need ours. God, we know that your plan is for everyone to have enough, that no one would go without. And you've called us as your church to be a witness, a taste of that kind of world. And I pray that as we practice our giving together and as we practice our coming together as a people, God, that you would begin to make us more generous. God, I pray as we speak about our practices and liturgy as a church, God, that you would remind us of the extraordinary things you can do with the ordinary things that we do. And God, I pray that we wouldn't be enticed by novelty, but we would be reminded that consistency and commitment are things that you have called us to. And we pray that you would do your work in us as only you can do, that we would be remade more like Jesus. Amen. It's about you all to stand as we're going to come around the table. I had this little image of what God can do with what we bring together in a church event once where we all went down south, and it was we were to get there kind of just after work or leave after work and get down and share a late dinner or supper, and everyone was told to bring something to share as they were able, and then we would have dinner together. And when we got there, not everyone, actually some people didn't have time to pick up things. Some people, weren't able to, there were young people who were students who didn't really have much at home that they could raid from their parents' fridge, or, for whatever reason, not everyone can bring stuff. But people bought, and the table was literally overflowing with the things that they'd bought, so much so that the next day there was enough that we had supper again the next day based on what everyone had already bought. And I think that's a beautiful picture of what it means to come together as community. We bring what we have, or we bring what we can, and something miraculous happens. God does something when we come to the table together, show up as ourselves and bring what we can, and we'll find that when we do that, God meets us there. He shows up in the midst of what's happening there.
Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at West City, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.